Hey everyone, let's talk about director Sam Raimi. He is pretty cool when it comes to making horror films. There is one problem with him, however, I noticed that kind of interrupts with him becoming a horror legend, and that is the fact that he hasn't made enough horror films. He marked his word for what kind of films he enjoys doing and kind of art style he enjoys when he created the Evil Dead trilogy. That seemed to simplify what he was going for. He's this silly kind of gore, violence, suspense, jump scares, all that stuff in a very silly but also really over the top manner. That seems to be the kind of thing he liked to do, and from there it seemed like he just become amazing at it for horror flicks. But then he went on to direct non-horror films, while still sort of, kind of, but not as much in the whole advantage using those techniques. He made Darkman, a dark superhero movie that sort of followed, had similar elements to Evil Dead, but for the most part wasn't a horror movie, so it didn't go all out. And then from around the late 90s to 2000s, he kind of just gave up on horror films, made non horror movies. Some he didn't even really use his methods for. He just kind of made because whatever, he wants to do something different, I guess. Then, of course, he would go on to become more popular for directing the Spider Man trilogy, a trilogy of non horror films that use some of those similar methods, just again, not to the full advantage for what he did with the Evil Dead films. After that trilogy, he went back to trying to go back to horror when he made Drag Me to Hell. So it seemed like he was finally up and back for making more of these horror flicks. But then he didn't really do much of that anymore. He kind of just went back and forth on it. And I feel like we haven't really been seeing enough horror films from him. And that's too bad. I feel like if he made more horror flicks like the Evil Dead movies, maybe he'd be up there as one of the most legendary horror directors with people like freaking John Carpenter or Wes Craven. That's a pretty high bar, but I don't know. I feel like the kind of style he uses and what he goes with would really give him a high name in horror drama. It's just the problem is he hasn't made enough horror films. He's only made Evil Dead movies and a couple of others, so it's kind of not. He hasn't really been stable too much. Everyone just sees him as the guy who directed Spider-Man movies, so it's like he's not as legendary of a horror director as he could be with how many films he directs. Anyway, I bring it up because this year he introduced us a new film he directed, and it's a horror movie, so good on that. Send Help. Here's a movie that I saw because I'm a fan of the director, I'm a fan of horror films, and I'm a fan of Rachel McAdams. And I'm also a fanboy of Rachel McAdams. So yeah, those are all good reasons for me to want to see this film. I saw it, and let me explain what I thought. So the plot of this movie, it's basically we start off in this. We see Rachel McAdams, our main character. She works in an office, and we are also introduced to this other character who, every time I look at him, all I see is a mix of Gary Cole from Office Space and Christian Bale from American Psycho. He's just those two characters fumed together. So that's all I see him as. But anyway, he's not important. There's the CEO of the company who doesn't promote her to vice president even though she felt she deserved it. So she goes to his office, complains hard about it, and it's just, yeah, we see she has guts or whatever. So then they take this big business trip, go on a private plane to try to work on finance or whatever there is their business is. I don't work in these kind of things, so I wouldn't know too much. But anyway, during their trip, Rachel McAdams sees that she is being mocked and made fun of by the other guys because they watch her try to film her own tapes for the show Survivor, since she's a diehard fan of that show and loves to be like them. But just after they laugh at her, the plane crashes. Boom. Everyone dies, except for Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien. Those are the main two people who end up surviving the plane and end up stuck on an island. Is this literally just going to be the plot of Castaway? Well, what we have going on here is that Rachel McAdams is really going up with this. She's finding ways to survive. She's putting those Survivor product tapes to use, going all out with it or whatever, while Dylan is just like, bro, we should be searching for help. Why aren't we doing that? She's like, we gotta survive. I gotta build shelter and whatnot. And that just gets to that point where it's just like, I can't do this. We gotta get help. I need help. So he tries to work his own routes. And what we shift from the plot of Castaway to the plot of the DreamWorks movie, Madagascar. I remember that movie fondly. I remember during the middle act of that movie, and here we have the middle act of this movie, it's two sides against, one who's all in for the wildlife and one who wants to get home. Great, we're throwing that movie in too. But then later on, the film takes more crazy risks. At one point, Rachel McAdams has to get food and knows that there are wild boars out in this forest. She finds a wild boar, a CGI wild boar, who is disgusting, not just because it's blood, and not because it pukes blood at Rachel when she stabs it and some gets in her mouth even, but also snots a lot at her. Yeah, I don't know why I had to do that, but yeah. A lot of snot gets in there, it's guts on her face too, it's gross, but she ends up killing it. They have pork, so that's good. And later on, seems Rachel has become much more intrigued with all this. But then at one point, Dylan O'Brien, I'm just calling them by their actors' names, I do that with these reviews, gives her nice food to enjoy. She enjoys it, but then she starts to go nauseous and she's really nauseous, starts laying down. That was Dylan saying, haha, screw you, I've tricked you, I'm about to make my grand escape. And he grabs a raft that he was making and he escapes, only to get struck by waves, realizing that maybe doing it in the middle of the night when there's a high current was not the best idea. So she ends up saving him, and from there, she starts going crazy. She starts going all Kathy Bates on him, where she's like, you should know that now that you are suffering again, I have no problem using this knife to cut off your... She goes that route. She says that, and apparently they throw in this silly visual gag where she starts cutting. We see a lot of blood, and we see the guy's face is just like... And then it's revealed it's just like, haha, it's just a rat. I just killed a rat. Comedy. Well, don't we love it? She actually starts going berserk now. This movie taking a risk. We went from Castaway to Misery. It's a castery. I need to think about what I'm saying. Anyway, she's so crazy and dedicated with this that even at one point she sees a boat actually show up. That's the help. It's Dylan's fiance. She actually shows up. She's ready to save them. They have a boat and everything. And she's like, all right, follow me. I'll show you to him. She ends up killing both of them. Yeah. She has to rescue, but nope, she's not up for that. She has to continue her Stockholm syndrome or whatever on the boss. So she kills them. And she just, they still go on with this or whatever. But then at one point, Dylan finally finds out that his fiance was killed, and now it's time to take the turn. He goes after her. He's no longer into this. He's ready to kill her with that knife. And then we learn another crazy twist. It turns out there was actually a very nice rich house literally not far away from where they were. He just couldn't see it because it was hidden in an area that Rachel told him that was dangerous to go to. So he finds the house. He learns that knife that she had came from that house. She didn't just find it all washed off. And it's there. They throw it off. Battle with each other. They fight. Blood spewes, all sorts of stuff. What's going to happen? Is he going to eventually kill her? Or is the guys who own that house going to come in and kill her? And he gets to return home safely in the boat? I'll tell you what happens. In the end, she murders him. She becomes successful for surviving on this island. All the other bodies were not found. She becomes a successful woman, but also still remaining a crazy woman. This movie ends with our crazy woman winning the day. So yeah, that's what this movie's plot is. I love it. I love movies where the villains win. I love those. I've mentioned that a lot of times before if I haven't already, but those are always the fun kind of movies to enjoy. We're always just used to hero wins the day. That's what we would want. But it's always good to have a story where we focus on someone who can go as berserk as ever, just being just straight up insane chick, and yet she ends up being the winner. Because in a way like this, we've seen how it ended with Misery. The crazy chick was eventually killed off by a man who became crazy, and he gets away. But no, the crazy chick's always crazy. The dude just rates dead. She wins the day. She's successful now. So there you have it, folks. If you want to learn a lesson from this movie, it's very easy. If you want to become successful in life, just come up, find something dangerous to accomplish, and make sure nothing gets in your way of it. And if it does, just kill them. Okay, I'm not putting it in that route. I'm just saying this movie's plot did take a great turn. It felt like it was going to be formulaic at first, but then it turned out not to be formulaic. You could make arguments like I do when I say that this plot shares similar aspects to other things, but every movie's like that. I just like that this movie went with a new twist, added new crazy elements, and as long as movies do that, you really are set in things. Yeah, you got a good thing going. Alright, so I talked about how great the plot was. How about what its genres do? Let's talk about what this movie's adventure is. It's them getting trapped on the island. The whole adventure aspect is quite similar to Castaway. It's them going on a plane, them crashing in the ocean, waking up on shore, and just finding ways to build shelter, survive, and whatnot. So from there, you could just say that the adventure aspect of this movie is copy and paste, right? Well, like I mentioned, they do visit different areas. It's not exactly the same island that was used in Castaway and pretty much every other um, stranded on island movie that came out around that time. Now this one had different areas. We got to see her with come up with methods of surviving. Some new methods, it wasn't always her finding stuff out of FedEx packages like Tom Hanks, because this movie didn't need product placement to work. It just worked in its own way. It's just them exploring the island, new routes, and then of course there's that big rich house that he never saw until later in the movie. So yeah, they just explore the island, explore little areas. It's beautiful, nice little one of those nice little island journey films. I guess those can be fun to watch. I would criticize this movie's adventure for being too much like Castaway, but like I said, they find ways to shift things up. There was no crazy CGI boars in Castaway. There was no rich fancy house in Castaway. There was no Rachel McAdams going crazy blood in Castaway. So, yeah. From there, I guess I could say this movie's adventure was still really fun. Yeah, I'll go that far. But of course, what about its horror? Yes, the horror this movie has. How scary is it? Well, with every insane chick movie, you can get pretty scared. I don't want to be feminine and say that this movie's the idea of a movie having an insane chick works. Insane anybody, okay? I'm not saying just insane chick, though in ways movies present that, there is a difference. But still, yeah, the movies that focus on insane chicks, can be fun because it's a different kind of insane. It's whether it's someone who is a super big fan of you, someone who has a massive crush on you, someone who is just, not right in the head. And Rachel McAdams is actually kind of a mix of all three. She's someone who wants a higher position in her job, someone who wants to show gratitude and feelings for someone, someone who just clearly is shown to not be the normal woman you thought she was at first. She'll go crazy if she has to. That's what this movie illustrates. And yeah, it is pretty scary. It doesn't really get scary until we get to the end part. They try to tease the scariness with the plane crash scene, with there being a lot of blood and a lot of that Final Destination kind of thing going on. But even then, that could happen in any film. That's not really strict horror. The only horror part was the blood that we see. We see some guy end up hanging from the plane because his tie got stuck. That was pretty funny though. That was like Final Destination kind of deaths and whatnot. So that kind of teased the idea of this being a horror film. But other than that, throughout the movie, it was just them surviving on the island, having different thoughts or whatever. It didn't really feel that scary. Once she started attacking the boar, that's when horror came in. There was horror in terms of that blood, and in terms of all that snot that came out. Like, ugh, God, what, did it really need that? But this movie doesn't take a massive horror shift until, of course, Rachel McAdams goes berserk. Sure, insanity begins once Dylan tries to escape. So that's when she's like, I'm gonna cut your That's when you know this movie's about to get crazy. And so from there it does. Gets real crazy. She gets crazier, things get crazier. That's how it goes. That's something that Sam Raimi likes to do. Show us the idea that this will be a horror movie, but not really let out all that horror excitement he's good at until closer to the end. Because you gotta let the movie run so we know when we should really piss our pants or whatever. But what about in terms of suspense? Because this movie's suspense matches its horror. Because this movie does throw in jump scares a few times. There are jump scares with the boar. Like, when the boar first shows up, it's just, roar, I'm a CGI boar. I'm sorry to keep saying CGI boar, but like, come on, man. This movie really I tried to make it feel realistic, sort of, going forward, but those CG boars were kind of out there. Still, anyway, any other suspense other than that? Well, there was the insanity with this chick. There was the sudden plane crash that happened, but that happens with every kind of these films. The plane crashes randomly. It just happens randomly, of course. All sorts of crazy shit happens, even on that plane crash. There's bits where apparently they do close-ups of the faces because having the camera zoom in on someone, they look like. That's always good. That always works for suspense. It's really hard to describe the suspense of this movie in one particular manner. It's all over the place. It's character close-ups. It's things happening out of nowhere, jump scares. That's kind of where this movie suspense works. And when I say it works, I say it works. This movie suspense actually works. I actually jumped a few times. I actually got shook with it. I actually was starting to really dive into what this movie was going with. So, all I gotta say, Send Help actually was an amazing horror film. I did not think it was the greatest horror masterpiece of our time. That's kind of a big judgment to give a movie. But I do think this movie was actually really great. So I'm giving this movie an 8 out of 10 because I actually got more invested with it than I thought. I thought it was going to be formulaic. I thought it wasn't going to scare me. I thought it was going to be very easy to understand by points. But they actually were able to surprise us. And when movies surprise us, we gotta give them the thumbs up. Or at least, if they surprise us in a good way. Not like they surprise us with how bad the movie can get. No, I mean like how this movie surprised us at actually being more unique and intense than I originally thought. I like the way this movie shifts. I like the way this movie runs its plot down. I like how it's not too short, not too long. And it's just a pretty good way for Sam Raimi to show off he still can do horror. He hasn't gone strictly as the Spider-Man guy. No, his Evil Dead ways can still come. We don't have to always assume he can only make comic book-based movies now. I mean, they apparently got him for Doctor Strange, and I guess in a way that kind of mixed both Spider-Man and Evil Dead aspects there. Anyway, for the most part, though, I would like to see Sam Raimi branch more out into horror films. I don't know how many more films he wants to direct now, but if he does start getting back into directing more movies, I say get more into horror. Maybe lay off the Marvel films or any other kind of movies because you have a talent with horror. A talent that I feel would really be fun to present in more films. Because of how little horror movies you made with your talent, you haven't really been reaching as many heights as other horror directors have, and I personally think you could reach those heights. You just gotta show more films off for it. If you do that, then maybe one day we'll call you just as great as John Carpenter was. I don't know. I just think that Sam Raimi's directing styles for horror flicks is pretty over the top and ridiculous, but lots of fun. He does a good job with other films he directs. This is not me saying that he was the wrong choice to direct a Spider-Man movie. It was a weird choice, but he did do a good job with directing those films. I just think his natural talent with what kind of horror stuff he can do should really shine more. So I would like to see more of that. Maybe I can watch more of his films. But if he wants to direct more films in the future, maybe you should maybe take notes from this movie. This movie definitely should take notes for him to see what kind of more films he could make.